From 1995, that was King Crimson with the song People, co-written by our guest today, bassist Tony Levin. As a session player, Tony has worked with practically everyone, from Alice Cooper to Stevie Nicks, Paul Simon, David Bowie, Tom Waits, Yes, Todd Rundgren, the list goes on and on. As a member of King Crimson, he's recorded 5 studio albums with the group and has played countless live shows. Speaking of which, he's got one coming up on Halloween night at the NJPAC in Newark, New Jersey. Tony Levin, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Great to be here.
You know, I have to ask, because looking at your history with King Crimson, you were a part of King Crimson for a good spell in the 80s into the 90s. Then for a time you weren't a part of it, and now you're back to being a part of it. Can you sort of explain how that all came about?
I can, and it's an interesting story, as most things with King Crimson. We just don't seem to do things the way most rock bands do, and that's fine. That's part of the uniqueness of the band. So I was a very active member in the 80s incarnation with 4 of us, Adrian Belew and Bill Bruford and Robert Fripp. And then we kind of disbanded the band for a while, and in the 90s we started up again with 6 players in what Robert called the double trio.
Right.
Through the maybe 94 till the end of the 90s. And then in about 2000, 2001, there was a tour I couldn't do, and Robert said to me, Robert Fripp, what do you say you can consider yourself the 5th man in the group, and there are 4 of us touring. So I had a big chuckle when I heard that,
right.
And I said, that's fine with me. So I'm the 5th man. The next song I wrote, I called it The 5th Man. Essentially, we agreed that I wasn't going to be in that incarnation. I couldn't do the tour, and whatever albums they did afterwards, they would do without me, with Trey Gunn, but I should still feel like I'm in the band, and I did, not knowing what the future would bring. Even when you have plans in rock and roll, you really don't know what the future is going to bring.
Right.
So I was the 5th man for quite a while until 2008, when I was asked again to be active in touring, and I am ever since 2008. And we're on a wonderful swing now with 8 members of the band. So the players keep changing, and the incarnations of the band keep changing, but there's something King Crimson about it all, aside from Robert Fripp. Musically, there's something about it, and I'm thrilled to be in it. I was not thrilled to be the 5th man, but I didn't mind. And in a way, the fan in me, the bass player in me thought, well, geez, I want to be doing it. The Crimson fan in me thought, well, okay, I wonder what will happen. And Trey Gunn is an amazing touch guitar player. I wondered what it'll be like without me. And all of that worked out fine.
So you had that rare experience of being able to be a part of it and then also sit out in the audience and watch it.
I did indeed go to the shows. I did indeed, and it was not easy sneaking into the audience because I'm a little bit recognizable to King Crimson fans. And I did see a few shows and enjoyed them, and it was a unique experience. And you know, being the 5th man in a 4-man group, well, it's not for everybody.
Well, for King Crimson being in their 48th year, this is a pretty hectic tour schedule I'm looking at. It looks like right through November 26th, you're really not getting that much time off, so there's a lot of activity going on these days.
Yes, and that's a good thing, and that's not by any means our only touring of this year. We also toured in June, July.
Yep.
And some of us toured in the break in between. Some of us, myself included, toured with other bands. So touring is a good thing. It helps, I must admit, in my more advanced years. It helps if I'm not living on the bus or eating out of a trailer or something like that.
Right.
So we do travel and stay in a pretty reasonable way, which makes it easier. But I would do it anyway. I think I can speak for all of my fellow musicians at this level that it's the music that got us into it, and it's the music that keeps us going. And the chance to share that music with an audience every night is so special and so gratifying, rewarding in the long run, that you put up with what you have to do to travel and to not be home much, and it's a good deal. It's well worth it if you're cut out to be a musician.
And were you someone who followed the original incarnation of King Crimson in the late 60s?
Far from it. I can't remember that I particularly noticed King Crimson until I met Robert Fripp, which was in 1976 on Peter Gabriel's first solo album, when Peter had just left a band called Genesis. Mm-hmm. That was big stuff to the progressive rock fans. And on that same day, I met Peter Gabriel and Robert Fripp, and I found out about King Crimson, and I found out about Genesis. And amazingly, many, many years later, I'm still very involved making music with both of those great artists.
I was going to say, your association with Peter Gabriel, fruitful is not even the word. You know, I mean, from the beginning of his solo career, you know, I at least for how many years? 20 years?
Oh, it's a lot since '76.
Oh, my goodness.
I've been touring with more than 20.
Wow.
Enough that I don't remember the number, but it's a lot of years. And it's been, of course, it's been and it continues to be not only fruitful, but very rewarding to me as a musician and as a person. He's a sweet and wonderful person, humble guy. And it's been one of the most special relationships of my life.
This is one of those things that I think of everything as being 20 years ago, and it's really 40 years ago.
Well, I'll join you on that.
Right.
Yeah, I'll join you.
I was about 20 years ago. If I could, I'd like to set aside King Crimson for the moment and talk a little more about your session work. In addition to Peter Gabriel, you also famously played bass for John Lennon. Could you tell us a little bit about working on his album, A Double Fantasy?
Yeah, the sessions went pretty simple. It was over a period of only 2 weeks, and we made what became 2 albums. And as a bass player, you tell me what could be more special and more wonderful for any bass player at any level than to sit in front of John Lennon. He plays you a new song of his. He plays it on guitar. He sings it. Playing the bass part on that is one of the easiest things to do in the world. You just, of course, I'm playing in the Beatles. This is unbelievable.
Right. So
I was just honored to be there. I didn't have to strain and stress and sweat to come up with the part. They kind of, he didn't play me the bass part, but they sort of speak to you out of his music when you've heard that much of. You know, I don't have to learn his idiom. Of course, I knew the way he writes songs, and,
right.
and so it was a great pleasure, a great honor. And we sort of had fun on the sessions. I've heard tapes of him running the session since then. And I recall when I hear them that it was a little bit intense, that he was intense. He was glad to be in the studio, and he wanted to kind of fool around and jam on Buddy Holly songs and things like that. But he'd catch himself doing that, and he'd say, okay, let's get to work. Let's do a take right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, and that would be the take. So there was a little bit of, more than a little, there was a lot of edge to it. But we were all very friendly, and I was very pleased that he didn't know me or my playing when I met him. And he seemed to like my bass parts. Sometimes he'd say that, and later I found he had doubled some of the bass parts with other instruments playing them, which I felt was a great compliment. But my main feeling about it is I was just fortunate, kind of blessed in a way, just to be the guy that they happened to call for that session.
We're talking with world-renowned musician Tony Levin today, and another project I want to ask you about before we get back into King Crimson. I believe you recorded all the bass parts for the Pink Floyd record, A Momentary Lapse of Reason.
Yes.
Was it difficult for you to step into a role that would have been Roger Waters initially as the bass player, but he had left at that time?
Yes, he had just left. It wasn't difficult. It's not a band. I mean, you can't compare it to King Crimson, where the parts are difficult, the music's difficult, the process is difficult, and finding a new way to do the music is difficult. Pink Floyd is what it is, so I was called on to try to fit into that style, which isn't very difficult, and it was fun. David Gilmour was in charge of the sessions, and he's a prince of a guy, a wonderful person, and he was, I think he... one thing I can remember is one time on the outro where you just kind of vamp and you keep playing the song a long time, and I added a little fill, not a big fill, but like actually one note. I added one note to the very simple bass part, and after the take, we were talking about how he was, and David gave me a sort of wry smile, and he said, well, in Pink Floyd, you do that, but only at the very end of the fade you can do that one note. And I smiled. I said, okay. What was fortunate was, everything about it was fortunate, but I am the right kind of guy for that, because even though I can play King Crimson music, my instinct is to play quite simple, and I very rarely overplay. Actually, that one note is an example where I stepped out and did a little more than I should have in that situation. So I didn't have to make an effort of like, oh, don't play too much. That's the way I naturally play. So it was a good match, and I'm happy to have played on that album.
You know, you've played on so many sessions and for so many artists. I would imagine that the music of King Crimson that you're contributing to now is challenging and fun for you to play, but were there sessions maybe in the past where you're thinking to yourself, I can't wait for this to be over, this is not really entertaining to me?
Okay, you're getting dark now. You're getting to the dark side. I think I will admit that there have been some, but it was a long time ago, and I didn't choose to dwell on that at that time, and I certainly don't want to muddy up my mind with thinking back to what are some of those bad sessions I did. Yeah, anytime a musician who's in it for music is caught in a situation where he can't play good music, where it's not so good, then it's rough. It's rough to get through it. The other side of it is when you're on a session making a record with a really good special artist, or even with the special players, the other instrumentalists on the session, it can be inspiring. You can learn. It's like going back to school. Even though I'm a bass player and I'm usually always the only bass player on the session, I can learn about time from the drummer, or a guitar player I haven't worked with will play rhythm in some way that makes me think, wow, I have to learn how to do that a little bit. So that experience is a learning experience and a good one. Except, yes, you're right. There have been a few times that I couldn't see the good in the muddiness of the rough session.
Well, getting back to King Crimson, I understand there are a couple of new releases, or at least recent releases. The Elements of King Crimson 2017 tour box.
You've got me there. I'm good at playing the bass parts, and I'm always busy learning new music for Crimson, but I don't keep up with the releases. So
okay.
I don't think, I hadn't even heard of that one, and someone asked me recently about about another release, and I've seen it, and I've signed a few, autographed a few, but I haven't heard it.
Well, that other release would have been the Heroes live in Europe.
Yes.
Yeah.
From Berlin, and we added David Bowie's song "Heroes," which Robert Fripp, the band leader, had very distinctively played a wonderful guitar part back on the original, and we added that just for fun. It's very unusual, and it was a big surprise on that first tour where we did it, because Crimson just does not do covers of other bands. So that was fun, and I know that piece is on it, but I'm pretty immersed in trying to keep up with the band, and like I said, I get a handle on the music we're playing, and it's the office in England that decides what they're going to release and when, and yes, I'm occasionally asked in interviews about it, but I must plead my ignorance of the release. I'm sure it's good. We record all of our shows at a very high quality. We spend the afternoon sound checking for the recording, just in case there's some special version of the song, and the archives must be huge, but I know the quality gets pretty good. So in a way, we do concerts like recording quality, at least musically. We're not leaving microphones all over the place that are not placed well, or things like that. So all of our live releases are pretty good quality.
Your show in this area, the nearest one, is October 31st, Halloween.
That's going to be wild.
Yeah, at the NJ Pack in Newark. Then you're also swinging back around at the Beacon Theater in November, the 17th and the 18th in New York City, which is also near us. Also the Paramount Theater in Long Island on November 13th. So all up and down the East Coast here. And
I'm looking forward to all of those shows on the East Coast. They're going to be great fun for us, and for the many people who come to more than one show. We do try to vary the repertoire as much as we can from one night to another. If they'll allow us, we play a 3-hour show, so we have a whole lot of repertoire, but we can still mix it up from night to night quite a bit.
And I do know for a fact that you've got people who do go to multiple shows on these on these tours. You might see the familiar faces out in the audience.
Indeed, one gets to know the ones in the front. Yes.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Tony, for spending some time with us.
Thank you for having me. You're very kind, and I appreciate you giving attention to the Crimson Tour. It's very nice of you.